Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Protiviti and Robert Half Collaboration Forum. This is week 8 of our 2021 series, and it's great to be back with you all once again. My name's Paul Middleton. I'm a Managing Director in Protiviti, and I'm joined here today by my colleagues from Protiviti and by my colleagues from our sister company, Robert Half. I'm also pleased to introduce my co-host for today, Carolyn Clark. Since January and until the end of March, we are bringing you this series of debates on a range of topics to invigorate, challenge and inspire us all that are designed to bring us optimism in these tough times. And today we are delighted to focus on the themes and imperatives that are celebrated as part of International Women's Day 2021. For those of you new to our forums, we started these back in March last year with the intention of creating a regular forum for business leaders where, in the face of the challenges, the disruptions, the uncertainties you face, you could talk to each other, learn from each other, challenge each other and gain confidence from each other's perspectives. Almost a year has passed and the challenges, the disruption and the uncertainty still remains, and arguably are even greater. With an unlock date that seems so far away, new COVID variants, the effects of Brexit, global political turmoil, it's easy to lose perspective. So in this, our 4th series, we wanted to bring you renewed perspective, fresh insight, and a healthy dose of weekly confidence and optimism, as we believe that within this adversity, with collaboration and the right mindset, lies opportunity for us all. That opportunity should be one that we all have the same ability to grasp. But as we all know, that isn't always the case. Prejudice and bias of all kinds have for centuries so often made opportunity a privilege rather than a right. And sadly, that is sometimes still the case today, which is why celebrations such as International Women's Day are all the more important, particularly during a time like this when diversity and inclusion are key to achieving the themes we have discussed so many times in this forum: thinking differently, driving change, building bold strategies that are authentic, meaningful and relevant to all of our stakeholders. The International Women's Day rallying cry of "Choose to Challenge" should resonate even louder when we hear that, according to the World Economic Forum, none of us will see the goal of gender parity in our lifetimes, and nor will many of our children. Indeed, they say that gender parity will not be attained for almost a century. But we can all play a part in that journey towards gender parity. And this morning, we invite you to be inspired by 2 amazing panelists who will bring you their own perspectives on the social, economic, cultural and political achievements of women, reflect how much progress we have really made, the challenges faced by women today, and how we can collaborate to accelerate towards gender parity. As ever, I'd like to remind you that this is a forum where we want you to get involved, react to what you hear, and let us know your thoughts and questions. To get involved, you can raise your hand using the Teams button in the right-hand corner and we'll come to you. You can write your thoughts in the chat, or if you just can't contain yourself, you can take yourself off mute and let us hear what you have to say. But please do get involved, as it is infectious. Another way for you to get involved is by using some of the online polls we'll be having from time to time today using Menti. Some of you have probably used these before, and you'll be able to access these using the link that we post in the chat later on. The link will be completely safe, and your responses to these polls will take around 30 seconds and be completely anonymous, and we'll see everyone's results, what everyone is thinking at the time. Before we introduce our panelists, I'm delighted to welcome and introduce my co-host for today, Carolyn Clark. Carolyn recently joined Protiviti as a senior member and advisor to our UK internal audit consulting business. She is also a non-executive director at Starling Bank, chair of the board of trustees at Care International, and a board advisor at Agilix. Carolyn was also until recently the head of internal audit, risk and control at Centrica. So Carolyn, thank you very much for joining me today. You have known both our panelists for some time, so would you like to introduce them?
Thank you, Paul, and thank you for asking us to join you today. I'm delighted to introduce Helen and Esther as friends and colleagues at Care International. Care International is a major international development and humanitarian organisation with a particular focus and priority around women and women's economic empowerment. We're very proud and to lead the annual March for Women event, which we were able to run this year successfully as a virtual event last Sunday, with a rallying cry around stop telling half the story, to really try and promote the accessibility of leadership roles to women and the empowerment of women in leadership roles. To make the introductions, Helen Pankhurst is a tireless activist, campaigner and feminist, very generous always with her time. I can say, to the extent that at one point she allowed my now 13-year-old daughter to interview her for a school project. So I can't speak highly enough about her generosity of spirit. She builds on the legacy of her great-grandmother and grandmother, the suffragettes Emmeline and Sylvia Pankhurst, to bring a unique historical perspective to the challenges that we all face today. In 2018, Helen convened the Centenary Action Group as a cross-party coalition to end barriers to women's political participation and campaign for equal representation of women in leadership roles. She's had a long association with CARE International, which we're delighted to continue. And we're very, very pleased that she's agreed to come here today and really try and draw the parallels between the past, the present, and what we should all be doing to create a better future. Esther Kwaku is a fellow trustee at CARE International. Esther, as you'll see, immediately brings boundless energy, innovation, and describes herself as a storyteller, and in fact really makes us think about how we better tell stories and create new messages. She's an entrepreneur herself, having established a social enterprise, We Got Nerve, and I think her LinkedIn profile sums her up. She says, "I work under the radar on projects with purpose. I love joyful, authentic collaborations and conversations I can't stop thinking about. I'm driven by connectedness, and I like the messy bits in between." I think that sums her up perfectly. I want to start with Helen and really ask you to just look back, first of all, over the last 100 years. Women's opportunities have clearly improved dramatically, but at the same time, there remain so many forces that undermine gender equality. What do you think your great-grandmother and grandmother would make of where we are today? How would they critique our progress? And what would they think about our priorities for politics, education and work going forwards?
Thanks so much, and thanks for everybody. It's great to be able to talk about these issues, and you know, that point about optimism, challenge, adversity, the context in which we are in can be looked at very clearly when we look at women's rights and what's happened. And it's easy in some ways to get very depressed about it, as we'll see when we look into some of the details of the data. But at the same time, that point about the need to challenge and to demand more and to ensure that we don't have to wait another 100 years, that we all play our part in ensuring that change happens quicker, is at the forefront of my mind as we discuss these things. So to all of you who are listening, you know, what can we do? What can we all do individually, collectively, structurally to change things? And please do think about that and ask questions, put comments in the chat and so on, because I think that the point about looking back is very much to harness how we can go forward. I feel that passionately. I don't want to just talk about the past. I want to talk about how we can change the future because of that analysis of the past. So let's break it down a little bit. There were many questions that you asked me, and we could, you know, it's 100 years, it's a lot to cover, but let's look at politics and where we're at now. So if Emmeline and the other suffragettes were sitting here with us today on this Zoom call, I mean, firstly, the things that they would do with social media and the connectivity that we have now that they didn't have, that they would be doing very innovative approaches. And Esther, I think you would love some of their approaches from what I've heard about you. So what would they say about the political context? And I think what they would say is, yes, women have the vote, they have it equally. But in terms of representation, there's so much still to be done. in terms of statistics, we have 34% of women parliamentarians. In terms of the peers, it's 28%. In cabinet, it's 23%. 23%. Bearing in mind that, for example, in 2006, there were 36%. So just numerically, we can see that there's still so much to be done, and also that it's not just a straightforward things are getting better. Things can get better, but they can definitely also go backwards. And right now, it feels like, in terms of the visibility of women in politics, look at Brexit, look at COP negotiations, the cabinet, as I've mentioned, we are not on a straight projection towards greater women's involvement. Then you have to unpick some of the reasons around why and the structural constraints within Parliament. At the Centenary Action Group that Carolyn just mentioned, we've been looking at things such as the fact that in the 21st century, right now, in Parliament, there isn't an automatic maternity leave policy. There isn't in Parliament a maternity leave policy. They have just introduced a funding mechanism to start thinking about a structural automatic system. In the meantime, it's up to the individual parliamentarian to try and argue the case. And we have the example of Stella Creasy, who managed to ensure that there was funding for a locum. And also, we've just had new legislation around cabinet members having maternity policy, cabinet members, so not all MPs, and that's just happened. So there's so many structural problems that we could be talking about, and that explain the fact that we still have a paternalistic, patriarchal policy-making structure. And from that follows so much that's unequal, because if the policy-making doesn't have a gendered lens, then so much else in our society doesn't. So much for politics. What about work? What about employment? What about the sexual division of the types of work that we still see in the UK and globally? You know, who's doing what? The fact that low-paid work tends to be predominated, women tend to predominate in low-paid work. Gender pay gap reporting, I think the latest data is the median is 15.9, and the mean is 6.5 in terms of gender pay gap in the larger organisations that are covered by the gender pay gap reporting. Note, gender pay gap reporting delayed by this government because of COVID, so we don't have up-to-date data. And in terms of all employment, it's 15.5%. The gender pay gap is reducing, so we're on a good trajectory overall, but still, if you look at individual companies and much else besides, that's not the case. And don't get me onto the pandemic, because we'll talk about that later, and that's clearly taking us in a different direction again. Wealth inequality, maternity pay discrimination, again, a lot to be said. And I don't want to just say it's all problematic. Again, if those suffragettes were living here, I think they would be encouraged by a lot that's changed. But it has been 100 years, 100 years, and yet. Violence against women, still such a theme in terms of women's lives, very much the top news agenda right now because of the death of killing of Sarah Everard. Violence morphing through social media, the fact that so much of the horror on social media is a sexist, really violent, homophobic language. And also, by the way, you know, we're focusing on gender inequality on this, but it's intricately linked to other forms, other intersectional inequalities. So add issues of ethnicity, disability, class to gender, and you have a composite of reasons why some people are more discriminated against than others. I'm just checking time. Okay, so culture. Inequality around visibility of culture. Again, a lot that's changed. So if that suffragette was walking in the streets of towns and urban areas, they would see a lot that's changed. They'd be able to go into a pub and see that pubs, well, they wouldn't right now because of lockdown, but when that changes, they'd see, you know, the visibility of women and men talking together in ways that were, you know, are very different. And yet the plays that we watch, the films that we see directed with a male lens so often, the sports world, the domination of male sports on TV, on radio, funding, it's drip, 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 drip in terms of a culture that sees what men and gives visibility to what men say and do, and focuses primarily on what women look like. And that issue of what women look like as the lens through which we see women at work, in relationships, you know, the fact that high-heeled shoes and dressing up and all of that is still the defining way that women are presented. I think it's still so depressing. The fact that social media and the visibility of images is such that young, Carolyn, you're talking about your daughter who's what, 13 now? How old is she? 13. Yeah.
Yeah, she's 13 now, just turned 13. Yeah.
So if you position yourself in the world of the 13-year-old girls, with yes, role models that they can find that are very different, and yet a lot of the social media that they're involved in is around the image, their image, and the whole mental health issues that are attached to that are so problematic. I remember talking to a teacher who was talking about the first day in secondary school, and what happened was that a lot of the boys were looking at the photos of the girls and ranking them as to how hot they were. And the girls were complicit in this. The girls were happy to be involved in this ranking and interested in looking at it. And that's not a one-off. The issue of these little things that we have, these phones that we have that are so focused on the look often, majorly problematic, and more so, I would argue, than in the past. We see that a lot around the shaving, the shaving of girls, of women's legs and their private parts in ways that is getting worse and worse, and that's linked to pornography and the images of women around that. And again, I don't want to, it sounds like I'm just banging a negative storyline, and I don't want to be doing that. I think there's a lot that is very positive. It's just that sometimes the weight of the problems can be forgotten, and I want to highlight them, because unless we look at the norms, the cultures, the structural reasons why problems continue, I think nothing will change. You know, the fact that there's still, in essence, a social curfew for any woman, any age, as to where she goes, at what time, that global reality still, I think, is unacceptable. It's just totally unacceptable. And we all of us have a responsibility to push the boundaries, to keep pushing the needles in one direction, because otherwise all these factors contribute to things changing. And maybe one last point before I stop blabbering, and that's that this isn't a conflict between men and women. It never has been, and it never will be. Taking us back to those suffragettes, many supporters of the suffragette movement and suffragists were men. Many of the detractors were women. And that continues to be the case. You know, a lot of men are in support of feminism. A lot of women are against feminism. So this is about those of us who believe in the power of equality, the wonder of diversity. needing to work together and keep focused on making this a better world. Thank you.
Helen, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, ever so much for that. Really, really powerful. Just before we go to a poll, just to see what you all think, Carolyn, do you want to just reflect on some maybe some more business orientated points on that from what Helen said?
Yeah, thank you for that, Paul. I was listening to Helen and to the whole multitude of directions that took us in. But also just thinking about a couple of reflections that I think are probably very pertinent to some of the people on the call. And, you know, we mentioned statistics there in a parliamentary sense. We, of course, have had recently statistics from the business community with the Hampton-Alexander report. And I found it really interesting. We've made great strides in terms of having 30% representation on boards, and and let's not underplay that. That's a great thing to have moved forwards. But I was also hearing in the last few days that in a period of time when there has been more change at chief executive level than possibly ever before, only 5% of the chief executives that have been appointed have been female. 5%, 1 in 20. That's quite a shocking statistic, I think. And there are a number of things that sit behind what we need to do in order to make a change to that. But it's something that needs to start probably much earlier on in people's careers with a whole series of changes and interventions. The second thing that I was thinking about was around safety, and we've talked about physical safety of women and how we may or may not feel safe, walking at certain times of the evening and so forth. That plays out in very practical terms in safety at work, because most PPE, for example, was made for the male form and not for the female form. It was designed by men with men in mind, and there are many, many examples of that. Seatbelts, for example, are more effective for men than they are for females, again built by men with male forms in mind. So there's some really practical things that I think we can all be doing as we look at our businesses and organizations to really make sure that that representation is there in all aspects of our lives, and that we really do play our part in doing that.
No, Carolyn, thank you ever so much for that, and that really, I think, does build on what Helen's saying, add those perspectives. And I think, as you said, some very shocking statistics, I think, that you quoted there, Helen, and I think that's also reflected in some of the comments we can see coming in on the chat. I would now like to see what you all think. So we've got almost 100 people on the call. I'd like to run, and Esther, I'd like to come to you for your perspective after this, but I'd like to ask you, what do you think's happened? So if you follow the link in the chat, that will take you to a screen you will see, and in that you can answer this following question, which is, how much progress do you think UK society has made up till now in treating women equally? And so you can vote anywhere from 1 being no progress whatsoever through to 10 gender equality. Let's say your responses are completely anonymous, and I think we'd just be very interested to see what everyone thinks. So at the minute where you're all fence sitters, you're kind of in the middle around 5 or 6. But you can see the, okay, so that's probably going to stick around there for now. And there's one more question. So if you stay on that page, you'll see it's going to refresh in a moment. So very roughly, I think we can say that, we're veering towards people seeing that overall we're moving in the right direction, I think, towards gender equality. Now, the second question is, how much progress have we made in the workplace around equal opportunity and equal pay? So again, please, we're starting off with some people who think we're kind of right up there with gender equality, which is great to see. But again, the balance coming in as we're speaking, we have some people coming in around 1s and 2s as well. But again, there's kind of lots of lots of what we might call politicians' answers coming in right in the middle, around kind of 5 and 6 in that. So so some progress having been made. So thank you very much to everyone. That's just a really useful litmus test to see where we are. But I think both of them around kind of 5.5, maybe 5.4, 5.5. So Esther, maybe if I can come to you now, just to, I think, reflect on both the results that you see in the poll, maybe a little bit on what you've heard from Helen, and just to add your own perspective, I think, on what you see as being achieved over the last 100 years, and maybe some of those opportunities that are there for women as well.
Absolutely. So thanks for firstly inviting me onto this panel, and it's great to see friends as well, and to be part of this community. I thought the poll was really interesting. The fact that it's kind of, wavering in the middle somewhere speaks a lot to what Helen was saying about, there has been some progress made, but in many ways it's striking. It's so striking to hear about the big disparities around gender pay gaps, for example. So it is interesting to see that, and the equal opportunities and pay gap kind of wavered at the high end and then got pushed back, which I thought was quite interesting. So wavering in the middle, and I think that made me think about how well are we informed about what the current status is, and how much does information and sharing that information and being informed about what's really going on play a part of that. How much do we really know, and how much are we paying attention to? In terms of what Helen was saying, again, this I can speak, for a long time about this, but I think all of some of the key points around not waiting and challenging and making sure we demand more really stood out for me. We don't want to wait another 100 years to see the changes that we've made so far. We don't have that luxury of time for so many different reasons, from what's going on at home, what's going on in the workplace, to climate change. Women are hardest hit in climate change and have been hardest hit during the pandemic. So, we don't have that time. We need to find better ways to organise and collaborate as well. And I think in terms of the culture and the representation of women in imagery and what we're seeing, in the media and so on, I do think it has gotten better, but it's not enough. It's not enough, and it's not enough to progressively inch towards progress. Not enough. We need to in many cases very more aggressively, or more, I guess, pursue those challenges with more energy and with more, determination, and question ourselves when something doesn't look right, when something doesn't feel right or sound right. We need to be in the space to have those hard and those tough conversations. And it's each of our responsibility. It's not a men or a women, it's all of our responsibility to do that. So I think that theme of International Women's Day around choosing to challenge is absolutely spot on. It's what we all need to really encompass amongst our peers and our friends and our colleagues. So yeah, I think there was a lot to really unpack in that. So just,
yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. Helen, I'd maybe like to come back to you, because I know that in your book you marked where you think we'd made progress on some of those topics. In some senses, given that 100 years have passed and we're only at 5.5 or so on the scale, is that, from both a societal and a workplace perspective, are you surprised by that sentiment? Is that over optimistic in your view? Pessimistic? What do you think?
So I think first point is, by that indication, us as this collective of 100, we're saying it will take another 100 years. That's what we're saying, isn't it? I mean, if we were to extrapolate. So again, is that good enough? No, it's not. Therefore, we all need to do more. Secondly, the fact that we had that variation across the different people that were responding, from basically 0 to 10, also really interesting, because that's either experience or it's perception. So for those of you who are at the 0, take comfort in the fact that some people think we've done better. For those that you are at 10, please look around and see how other people are experiencing things differently. In the book, I'm also really interested in the differences that we score for different things. So how do we score politics versus economics versus violence versus culture? And I score it for myself, but I'm also really encouraging my readers, having looked at some of the data and some of I use a lot little quotes from people, so what people are saying, so based on that, what do people think? I also changed my scoring between the hardback and the paperback. So on the hardback of the book, which came out in 2018, I had certain scores, and on the paperback, which came out in 2019, I decreased 1 score. And it was actually the identity score, and it was to do with hearing so much about this focus on women's looks, and some of the sense around women's bodies, and that's come up in your chats. You know, the issues such as maternity, menopause, a world that really doesn't get that we need to better understand the whole health repercussions of what it is to be a woman, and also the interplay between home and work and how that plays out. There's a chat question around, it would be interesting to know how many women and how many men are on this call, and I would be fascinated to know how that compares with how many you normally get on other calls. You know, are we getting mainly women here today? And if so, is that reflecting the sense that women, an interest in feminism is seen to be, or an interest in women is seen to be the domain of women, and how do we make sure that we don't word it that way and people don't experience it that way?
Thank you, Helen. So I think that's fascinating, and I think we might come on to the question of role models shortly. I did want to just ask in the first instance, Esther, you talked about rising to the challenge, and I'm really going to put you on the spot here a little bit, so apologies for that. But, you know, can you give an example of where you've really stepped up and, you know, a situation where you had to kind of step into it and create the opportunity for yourself or for other women, whether that's here or whether that's with some of the work that you do internationally through your social enterprise?
Thanks for putting me on the spot there, Carolyn. Always happy with the challenge. So yeah, I think I'll speak from an international perspective here. So through the NERV network, which is the social enterprise that I run, there is a focus on finding the most powerful thing to unlock amongst marginalized, vulnerable communities, and especially women and girls. And I want to talk about Bira. So she's a young lady that we work with in Uganda. She makes the amazing banana pancakes, right? Amazing banana pancakes. And we go and visit Bira and we see where she's working. But her aspirations are around fashion. She wants to get into fashion and retail and, you know, expand her business. But really, in order for her to make that leap to be an entrepreneur, there's a whole range of things that play a part in that ecosystem in order for her to access markets, access training, access education. You know, how does she get there? And so through our work, we identify Bira as a, you know, as a rising leader and as a woman leader in her community, because when you pass that on to Bira, when you can help her unlock those challenges, she will pay it forward. And it's proven that when you do that and when you invest in women and female entrepreneurs, they are more likely to pay it forward, pass that on. So you have this whole multiplier effect. Super, super powerful. The same happens in education. When you educate a girl, you know, she's less likely to have an early or child marriage, and, you know, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot there that's, I think, very powerful when you invest in women as leaders in their own communities. And so that's part of the work we do, is recognizing that and saying, you know, Bira, what do you think? You know, what do you think you can do? What can you bring to the table? Not giving her the answers, but allowing her that space, you know, and the tools to feel confident, because it's not always in the culture of you know, in certain countries that you go to, that a woman can speak up, you know, especially for girls who can't speak up, you know. So it's about providing her with those tools and those platforms and those mechanisms that she can really speak up and she can lead the way. So I think that's really inspiring to me, and you can see it play out. So, you know, when you visit someone like Bira 6 months later, not only has she brought, you know, started to access resources in order to help her be that fashion retailer, she's built the shop. And this actually happened. You know, we visited Bira and she'd built the shop, and it was the conversation that unlocked her, you know, that confidence and that willing her to, you know to encourage her that she can be and aspire to what she wants to do. So I think that's a really important part of our program, and it happens in Care. You know, I'm a trustee of Care as well, and I'm so inspired by Care's programs because it's the same thing, that it's about finding those channels that help unlock women to be leaders and be voices and be vocal and lead their communities as well. So I'm all over it. I'm just going to leave it
there. It's fascinating to hear, and I think we will come on just later on to some of the more international examples, I think, that you can bring, and actually we'll kind of see whether and how we can learn from some of those in the UK as well. But thank you for all the comments coming through on the chat. It's fascinating. It's great to see the reactions and the thinking there. I would like just to pick on one of those questions. And Lauren, I don't know if I'm going to put you on the spot, Lauren. You've asked a question around, well, actually, I'm going to let you ask the question, which I think kind of encapsulates a lot of the thinking there. Would you be able to ask that?
Yeah, sure. I guess my question was to touch on actually something Carolyn mentioned, but actually it makes up a lot of what's already being discussed so far about the lack of involvement in women decisions. And, you know, where product design and all decisions that impact us, it feels like women are being excluded. But I guess bring on 100 years of reform and women empowerment, we're still not being asked the question, why?
Carolyn, would you like to kick off with a response to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I think it talks to many of the things that both Helen and Esther really have been picking out. And, you know, sometimes I think it's just that we don't step back to think about it. We don't step back and question why we do the things the way that we do them today. And for me, if there's one thing that we can all take away from this discussion, it is to challenge and to step back and ask why. Why do we do it that way? And is there a better or different way of doing things? And there was a really nice example that was brought up on Sunday at the panel session that Helen facilitated for us, the March for Women panel session, talking about the Land Rover Epoch. Now, I'm not a car person at all, but I found it really interesting to hear about the process that they had gone through in deliberately engaging and involving women equally in the design process, because they recognize that 50% of drivers are female. And if you want to sell more cars, then you need to create cars that are attractive to all people. And in doing so, they created a vehicle that's multi-award winning, has won the award for the most attractive car for women. I'm not going to get it right. There'll be somebody on this call who corrects me in terms of the specifics of the award. But I went away and looked that up, and I thought it was a really fantastic example of bringing women into the design process and creating awareness that, you know, doing so is not only the right thing to do, it is good for business as well, and it creates, you know, an inclusive opportunity for everybody. I think also, you know, Esther's example, I have similarly experienced the impact that Care's Lend with Care programme has in Rwanda in particular. I was fortunate enough to go and visit some of our programs over there, and looking at how when you create financial inclusion, for women, and women, as in so many other areas, are more likely to be excluded from the financial systems. When you create very, very small microloans, you enable women to get involved in their own businesses, to become entrepreneurs. You know, I met a lady who had literally bought a light bulb, or the means to light a light bulb, and was then providing light in the evenings for children to do their schooling, because they were required to help out on the farm during the day. And in doing so, a village was educated, but a woman was also able to feed her children because she started to create a profitable business. So I think there's so many levels upon which we can all make a difference, be it in the design process for a Land Rover, albeit in creating the opportunities for women across the world to become their own business owners. I don't know if Helen or Esther wanted to add to that.
Very briefly, I think the why question is always the most powerful one, because why challenges the establishment, it challenges the current status quo. And I think fundamentally, the why is the reason for the inequalities are that society has been developed with a certain way of doing things, a certain hierarchical way of doing things, and we need to challenge that and bring in collaboration, because collaboration means you get different eyes, different perspectives, and that starts to change everything. But asking that question, why, that is critical.
Can I add, you know, I think this why is really important as we seek to address climate change at the moment. You know, this is the pressing issue that we have to continue to focus on and address. It has a disproportionate impact on women around the world. We know that COP26 does not have the level of female leadership that it should have right now. And we know that choices will otherwise be taken that don't properly take into account the needs of all of the population and all of our resources, you know, by people who probably are not running households in the same way and understanding many of those issues. So I think in terms of questioning why and really thinking about the role that we can play, you know, focusing on that agenda is really important right now.
Yes, Carolyn, thank you for that. I think the why is so powerful. And just building on that, Esther, I'd like to come back to you then. And in terms of, and Lauren, thank you for that question. Just to build on some of the themes there, Esther, to what extent do you think role models are becoming increasingly then important in the lives of women of all ages, but maybe especially younger women, to help ask why and to help challenge the norms and to help in this journey that we're looking at and saying it's 100 years?
Absolutely. And so to link from the why and the questions, I would say, because role models can also help to question why not and what if, and other really powerful questions as well. You know, what if this XYZ? But I think role models are really, absolutely really important. It's something that I'm quite passionate about. I've had, you know, role models and mentors, you know, men and women who've been very instrumental in my journey. I have mentors that are younger and older than me, and you know, from all walks of life as well. So it's really important. You know, I'm a storyteller, so you know, I've drawn a lot of inspiration in how to, I guess, bring my authentic self to the table, which I think is something, you know, really, really valuable, and connect to humanity and stories of, you know, of communities and people around me. I've also, I think, you know, role models, just linking with Carolyn's example as well about Lend with Care, you know, I've come across communities who, you know, many of them women who are building their own schools on tops of mountains. You know, they are literally building schools by carrying materials and corrugated roof sheets and bricks to build schools anyway, long before charities have reached them. You know, and they're raising money and they're campaigning and they're lobbying and they're marketing and they're doing all the things, you know, roles that we pay. So in many respects, they're no different to us. You know, they're doing the same thing anyway. So I think there's a really key lesson there in that, you know, this us and them idea, you know, we're actually that you know, those that we're trying to serve are not kind of, you know, over there doing something. So, but coming back to the question about role models, I think I think that there's definitely a huge value in, you know, finding those role models that light you up, you know, and that grow with you as you know, go through different life stages, especially if you're a young woman, and especially because of some of those pressures that we talked about around, you know, competition or social media or imposter syndrome and all of those things that society tells young women they should be, you know, nowadays. It's really important that they can find those that they can look to, who can just tell the story as it is, and very importantly, not only inspire and help them to grow and be the best version of themselves, but who can also say to these young women, you are enough. Like, as you are enough. It's okay, you know, and to provide them with that guidance as well. Just as a final point, so one of my role models is Maya Angelou, who at the age of 80 was still saying that she's still learning. And I was watching a clip of her talking, giving an interview, and it was something she said that I'll never forget. And she said that, you know, always keep something for yourself that no one else can touch, like no one else can touch. So it could be a value or it could be an aspect of yourself that no one can touch. So for me, it's, you know, my reputation, you know, to be known as someone that, you know, does some good. So no one can touch that. And it just helps you to strengthen your own values and really kind of root yourself in, you know, in terms of my purpose and in my lifetime. This is the one thing that no one can come near, you know, this is the thing that I will safeguard and protect. So I think that's also an important thing for young women, is to, you know, that authentic part of yourself, that thing that, you know, no one can touch, you know, and kind of find role models that help you develop those strengths and those parts of you that you're passionate about.
Thank you, Esther. That's fantastic here and so inspiring. Helen, I wonder if I might just come to you for a perspective on that as well, please. I mean, you spoke earlier and you mentioned in your book around how, you know, very often, you know, people in very senior positions aren't role models at times. Can you just talk to us about your thoughts on the importance of role models as well, and where you see that in society at the moment?
Yeah, role models are critical. However, the structures of inequality are there, and in a way, I think what I would like to argue is that we need to approach this in different ways. So partly there's what we do in our own lives, and role models are critical in that. Then there's what we do together. So not a single role model, but how we provide role models together, and that collective. Because I think when we think about role models, we think of an individual, don't we? And I'd like to broaden it. How can we think about the collective role models, the institutional role models? And then there's how do we, what are the structural changes that we can achieve? I was also thinking, you know, a bit like Esther's point about keeping something for herself. For me, it's about campaigning with fun and purpose. So my life is about fun and purpose, and it's getting that balance. Yeah. So if that helps people, fun and purpose as a motto.
Absolutely.
And then I was also thinking about my role model. So my role model, and apologies for those of you who can see the back, I've got half is feminism and the other half is Ethiopia, basically. Those are the two influences of my life. I grew up in Ethiopia. And representing that very much is my grandmother. And there's a book that's been written about her. This is the book. I mean, I'm just showing you because you can see how big it is. So this is about Sylvia. It's a whopping tome. And the reason it's a whopping tome is that she was just phenomenal in so many areas. And I just want to pick out 2 points because I think they're important in role models. And one was that she understood that people had to speak for themselves. As a leader, your role is to find spaces in which you can encourage others to speak. It isn't to keep talking, to keep saying, to keep leading. It's facilitating the voice of everybody so that then decisions can be made. And she was doing this as a suffragette. So she worked in the East End of London, and she felt very much that it had to be working class women that spoke, that came to Westminster and gave their position, rather than the position of her mother, Emmeline, and her sister, Christabel, who were very much about leadership. And this is what we say, a militaristic view of leadership. So as a leader, facilitating the voice of others, as a campaigner, making sure you're not just campaigning on your vulnerability, the point that you want to change for your life, but for others. And I suppose that was the second point, is that things are so interconnected, and I think understanding those interconnections results in more powerful change. So rather than just going in one direction and thinking this is the way to do things, looking around, the blue sky thinking, the left of center approach can often be more powerful than just picking the low-lying fruit of your, straightforward approach. So just a few ideas there.
Helen, thank you for that. And I guess it's one other point that I want to bring out, because I think it's really relevant, is the question not only of role models, but allies. And again, I think sometimes, I feel it when we're talking about ethnic diversity, for example, the question of what can I do, because I have the privilege and power in that situation, clearly. And allies, I think, are as important as role models. We all need the people in our lives that will give us that support and that mechanism to step forward. And I would give one example, perhaps because it might be inspiring. The chair of Care International before myself was an individual called Oliver Stockham, who is a very traditional banker, been in banking sector in all of his life, and yet at the age when I was in my sort of early mid-30s, he invited me onto the board of Care, and there weren't many that were doing that at that point. And then he's now the chair of Starling Bank, and has not only provided much of the support behind the scenes to Anne Bowden to achieve what she's been able to achieve, but also again gave me the opportunity to get onto that board and to do something that my background was not particularly aligned with. He's an ally, and he's an ally that comes from a very traditional place, but has been prepared to take personal risk in doing that. And I think we can all do that if we choose to do so, in combating whatever kinds of inequality there are. I'm conscious that we've not got so much more time, and I just wanted to go back to, I guess, what Helen pointed out then, her sort of twin interests around Ethiopia and Africa and the international community and feminism and supporting the role of women, and really ask a question that is about learning. And what do we learn from the wider world? How do we look beyond our own barriers, and where do we think, really in the UK in particular, and many of the participants on this call will be in the UK, but not all, I think. How do we learn from progress made elsewhere and actually show humility, I guess, in doing that? Helen, if I could ask you first.
Yeah. Two thoughts come to mind. One is, if people have commented on this already, I think, in the chat box, but if we look at the leaders around the world that have dealt with the pandemic effectively versus those that haven't, there are those that argue that some of the women have done much better than the few women that have been leading have done, proportionately much better than the men. But looking beyond that, why is that? It's not because they're women. It's because of some of the leadership styles that they have brought to the table. And in particular, there's been an analysis around populism versus looking at the facts and then doing what needs to be done. And that those leaders that have fared the least well have been those who are just worried about doing the thing that's popular. So I guess making sure that we're driven by the science, the reality, the experiences as something that's really important. The second thing I was thinking about was there are countries that have suddenly done very, very well. And I'm thinking of Ethiopia. So, for example, politically, women were nowhere to be seen. And we had history of conflict and violence and all the rest of it. And then there was a new head of state that came in who brought in 50-50 cabinet. The president that was selected is a woman. All sorts of things started to change. He addressed the conflict with Eritrea, and I could go on. But suddenly, from a country that felt incredibly repressive in terms of issues around rights and even economic opportunities, etc., it seemed like everything had opened up. Everybody started to work, and it was incredibly positive. And it's a warning story, really, because then something went wrong, and we're now back into conflict in Tigray, one part of Ethiopia. Just a sense that this hope that was there was suddenly taken away. So I don't want to be the doomsayer, and I seem to be on this call, but I guess what I'm trying to say is there isn't a silver bullet. There isn't a silver bullet in terms of looking at another country and saying they've got all the solutions. None of the countries, even the Scandinavian countries where we tend to look at in terms of solutions for gender equality, none of them have got there. Therefore, back to all of us, every single one of us needing to take responsibility for shifting things in their personal spaces, in their workplaces as citizens. And in their personal places is so important, I think. I remember talking to some women about this, and there was one who was saying, I'm a really good campaigner when it comes to signing petitions, and at work, I'm really feisty around feminist issues, but don't look at me at home. Don't look at what goes on in terms of who does what at home and so on. And I think that what she was saying is acknowledging that actually there was the work that she needed to do was to make sure that she didn't treat her son and her daughter slightly differently, that she questioned when her parents were saying things that were inappropriate. The stories around grandparents that talk to their grandchildren very differently, that ask their granddaughter whether they have a boyfriend yet, and ask their grandson what he wants to be when he's older. So yeah, I'm circling back to that sense that we can all make a difference in different ways, and that we can't just look outside and say this other country or this other person has the solution.
Yeah.
Helen.
Thank you very much, Helen. We've only got a minute. Esther, I'm gonna really unfairly put you on the spot again. Helen's just covered I think some key things that she wants people to take away from this. 3 things from yourself. What would you like people to take away from this? What action would you like them to take to close the gap over the next 100 years, even more quickly?
Ooh, so I would say that this call to action around challenging when something doesn't feel right, I think that is, really challenge. Don't dance around the edges, really challenge and ask the whys, I think is an important one. Linked to that, I would say, educate yourself about the things that bother you, or the things that don't and why they don't. And just keep having those hard conversations. I think, you know, as Helen was saying, I think that, you know, there are no silver bullets, but there are pockets of brilliance, right? There are pockets of brilliance. There are movements, there's innovation, there are policy changes happening, you know, all over the world. So, you know, hang on to those, because I think there is definitely hope. I have loads of hope and optimism for the future.
Absolutely, and that shines through. And thank you both. That was amazing. And I think, you know, you can see from the comments in the chat, I think, how much it has inspired people to hear those thoughts that you shared. So thank you both ever so much. We've run out of time. It's 9 o'clock, but I'd really like to thank you both once again, and Carolyn as well, for being such a fantastic co-host and for sharing all of your thoughts as well, Carolyn. I'm sorry if I didn't get your question directly, but hopefully we got the spirit, I think, of most of the questions coming through. There'll be a video of this forum, as some people have asked for, that will be on our website and also on YouTube as well. So please share with your colleagues, your friends, your LinkedIn contacts. Next week, as promised, we'll be focusing on the future of business. For our last 2 weeks in the series, we'll be looking at that and kickstarting the debate by hearing from a CEO who's been at the forefront of driving change and helping meet our changes in consumer demand, and that's the CEO of delivery company Yodel, Mike Hancocks. So until next week, on behalf of my Fertility and my Robert Half team here and Carolyn, I'd like to extend our best wishes to you all. Stay safe, be bold, be kind, ask why, if you take that from today. And we look forward to all seeing you again next week. Thank you very much, everyone.